I'm going to steal 5 minutes, hopefully no more, and just tell you a little bit about Virsec. And I like to joke, since we sponsored the food, there's really no such thing as a free dinner. You have to listen to me for a few minutes. But I want to reserve most of the time for the panel members here, because these guys are the experts. These are the smart ones here. But we're a pretty unique company. We are a Silicon Valley-based startup out of San Jose. We've been building some pretty cool technology for the last 3 or 4 years. We brought it to market about 6 months ago. And we take a very different approach to security. So many of you are involved in security, probably almost all of you. And we have some pioneering stuff we're doing around protecting applications while they're running, as opposed to before or after. So I just want to give you kind of the speed view of why we think this is important, and then segue into the discussion here. So we can talk about the converging trends out there, things that are happening. There's lots of scary stuff. There's headlines every day. But I see a couple trends that are converging that are really problematic. First of all, the number of vulnerabilities that are being discovered is skyrocketing. Now, maybe that's because we're getting better at discovering them, but I think our software stacks are so much more complicated. The National Vulnerability Database, if you ever look at it, it broke 20,000 vulnerabilities last year, close to 100 a workday. And if you think we just caught up on all the 100 from yesterday, then Monday morning you've got 300. It's unmanageable. One of our customers told us they spend about $50,000 hunting down an actionable vulnerability and actually doing something about it. So we've got a problem on our hands. These are being exploited. You've heard about the big name attacks. We particularly focus on memory-based attacks, and the household names like WannaCry and NotPetya and InDestroyer and LockerGoga, yeah. They all have a memory-based component. They're all attacking applications while they're running. And it's really a new frontier for attackers. And if you look at Maersk, the shipping company, they lost $300 million from one attack, just from NotPetya. And we keep hearing about these, crises one after another. But it's real, and there's something's changed. Now, the obvious reason you should care, hopefully no one's logos are on here for their companies, but every day there's a new victim of an attack. This is the CISO's worst nightmare, to wake up and see your name on the front page. And it's all part of this same stew here. So if I break it down to incredibly simplistic terms, I think there are some things here that are problematic. So attackers are going after blind spots. Maybe that's not new. They're always looking for gaps and openings. But they're going after blind spots in applications, and they're finding them. And our response time is just way too slow. Orders of magnitude slower when we're able to actually do something about it with conventional tools compared to how fast the attackers are. And then more fundamentally, if we talk about application security, it's really going to be our topic here. How do you know your apps are doing the right thing, particularly when they're running? Do your SecOps people actually know what the apps are supposed to be doing? So can they tell if something bad is happening? And these are structural problems. So when we talk about runtime protection, I like to think about tools that are either before runtime or after. So if you think of the history of most security with firewalls and IPS and WAFs and endpoint protection, many tools are trying to filter out things before they hit your applications. And we have 30 years of developing good technology to do this, but it's always kind of a guessing game. You're good at stopping things you've seen before, but if you haven't seen it before, it's guesswork. Now, there's another line of tools like EDRs and other forensic tools and various AI tools that are looking after the fact, trying to see what can we deduce from the breadcrumbs from an attack that just happened and do something about it. Also a lot of good technology, but they're kind of both looking outwards and ignoring the actual application. Now, what between before and after is during. And runtime, in many cases, has been kind of viewed as a black box. When the code's actually executing, it's too fast. We can't actually do anything about it. But the attackers are exploiting this. If you hear about memory-based attacks, fileless attacks, there are many ways that they can bypass conventional perimeter tools. And they're attacking applications while they're running, so they're really transient. They're not leaving clues behind. So this is kind of this fundamental problem that we're trying to solve. So in a nutshell, we are all about monitoring applications while they're running. We do this across the whole application stack, and by that we mean we protect at the web level. You've heard about OWASP, top 10 threats probably. The memory level is increasingly a concern with buffer errors, as well as the host. Things like changing libraries, corrupting processes, changing files, the integrity of the application. So we put all of these together, and there are really no other tools we know of that are taking this holistic view. There's lots of point solutions, and that's part of the problem in security is there is a whole history of point solutions. All right, last 1 or 2 slides, and then we'll get on to the fun stuff. I raised this challenge, how do you know your apps are doing the right thing? And this is a multi-level problem. So what we do is we essentially try to, well, let me back up, sorry, getting ahead of myself. So from when your apps are developed to when they're running, there's a theoretical chain of trust. But I think in most cases, it's not the same people. The developers probably aren't involved in the actual runtime of the applications. The SecOps people running the apps probably don't know what they're supposed to do. Now maybe the DevSecOps model will help to cure that. But there's typically a gap that's being exploited. So attackers are inserting malicious code, they're using malicious input, or they're simply just changing files. They're finding all kinds of ways to manipulate this. So what's running is not what the developer intended. Now our basic model, if you want to protect while something is running, you need a map. You need to know what's supposed to be happening. And we create what we call an app map. I won't go too deep into this, but we model what are the correct files, what are the correct libraries, the processes, sort of an automated whitelisting capability. We also then can look at interpreted code. We can get down to the memory level, every single memory jump within the application that it's assigned to it. We create this map, and then essentially while the app is running, in near real time, we're able to take action very, very quickly. So if something changes during runtime, definitively a problem, as opposed to more probabilistic models when you're outside the application or when you're looking after the fact. And then since we're doing this very, very fast in near real time, we're able to take action quickly as well. So we can do local actions, we can terminate a session, we can uninject malware, we can tell the firewall or the WAF to cut off access. So I think on that note, I will not spend any more time on our solution. I will just say that this whole area of memory protection, we do a lot of events like this because we have to be somewhat evangelists because it's not that well understood. Most of us build software where we're not dealing at the chip level, at the memory level. So, but this is being exploited. And Gartner has come out and said that memory protection, they consider it to be mandatory, and we're one of just a handful of vendors that do this. Also, interestingly, if you track MITRE, they came out a couple weeks ago with this list of the top 25 most dangerous software errors. And top of the list, this wasn't just a list of them, they ranked them as well, looking at both the frequency and the severity. So memory buffer errors top the list, significantly more dangerous, and there's a range of other both things at the host level, at the memory level, and at the web level. So, we hope this is a wake-up call for people to start paying more attention to what's happening while applications are running. Okay, I think I'll spare you too much of the marketing buzz here, but since I created it, I'll tell you anyway. So we think this model is better. We think it's definitely faster because we are in near real time. And we think you can reduce costs. The more accurate the solution, the plague of so many solutions is false positives. If you're not sure, then if you dial down your controls too much, you have false positives, so you end up dialing them back off, so then you let stuff get through. That's always been this kind of devil's bargain that we have to make. And this is an automated process. So I think on that note, let's get to the fun stuff. I will just say, if you want the slides, you just take a picture of that, and or you can contact me afterwards. My new favorite tool are QR codes. Okay, so let me, with the panelists' help, let me actually introduce people here. So I'll go down the, maybe not in the order you're sitting, but I'll go down the list. And I'm going to give you just the very brief introduction. I'd like each of you to tell me one thing professionally, technically, that you're proud of, and something totally out of the blue that you also like to do. hopefully not related to computers. So Jeff Schilling is the CISO of Epsilon, and I think he's got very broad security responsibility and experience, and both at the application level and a range of other network and applications. So, Jeff, what can you add to that? What are you particularly proud of?
Is this microphone on? Can you hear me? All right, cool. I'd probably say I'm a retired Army colonel, and I got the good fortune of serving at the enterprise level of the Department of Defense doing cybersecurity operations for 4 years, both at the Department of Defense level and as well as Department of Army. And I always like to say I was kind of like the Forrest Gump of cybersecurity. There were a lot of important people, a lot of important things happening when I happened to be there. But I was the guy standing in the corner with a clipboard kind of making things happen, running the ops center. So it was just a really neat time to be, well, actually it was a really scary time to be in the Department of Defense. One thing about me that's fun, I don't know if it's fun, but I like to mountain bike. I've got the scars and stitches to prove it. I wreck at least 2 or 3 times. If you're not wrecking, you're not trying hard enough. And so that's what I like to do in my free time.
Okay, great, thanks. So Sean, great, thank you. Sean Bruton is the CEO of Complyify, and Sean and I chatted a little bit, but you guys are, I think you said you were making GRC tools and services for smaller organizations that don't suck, to quote you.
Yeah, exactly. If you've ever used a GRC tool in here and you're not a large enterprise, you know they're absolutely useless. Yeah, so Complyify, basically, we made the TurboTax for cybersecurity, all the metrics that your company and your executives need to actually understand your risk posture. Some of the things that GDT is working on as well from their consultancy services, we put it into tooling and dashboards and everything you can use to orchestrate your activities with your company.
Okay, and
I know.
introduce Frank Walsh. Oh, sorry, you didn't give us the fun tidbit.
Oh, yeah. So, well, I guess the thing that I'm actually most proud of professionally is, since I'm in Dallas, I'm actually based in Austin, but we're the people that used to run all the Dallas Cowboys securities for Jerry World and everything like that back in the day. So if you ever went to the first couple years when the new stadium was open, before it was AT&T, you probably saw what they called the moment of exclusivity when the last startup I was with came across and the whole stadium went blue and said, Neospire, take care of our internet and our security. That was us. So that was cool. And since we had this bike story already, you wouldn't tell from my current physique, but I used to be really into professional cycling. And Chuck, who was up here before, says I'm the guy that got him into it. So,
Okay, great. All right, so Frank Walsh is with Virsec. He's a chief security architect. Frank has a very diverse background. He's been both on the development end and on the security end and the advisory end, working with enterprises all around the world to solve security problems for them. So Frank, a couple tidbits?
Willie. Sure. So I spent about 15 years working as a software developer and software architect, building some very large-scale enterprise solutions, helped build 2 of the largest educational data systems in the world, responsible for formative and summative assessment here in the United States. Then I transitioned working in cybersecurity with some really incredible experts at Tanium, at Malwarebytes, and now here at Virsec. So those are the business side. I guess 2 fun facts I'll give you. The first, any Penn State fans here today, other than me? Oh, all right, 1. I was the Nittany Lion once at a dinner for Penn State. And second fun fact, I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So anyone who is familiar with The Office, I hail from Dunder Mifflin. So.
All right, thanks, Frank. Okay, and I didn't mean to save the Allstate guys for last, but Tony Giannino, you're InfoSec manager for Allstate. And I think also from our discussions, you have a pretty broad security background and security purview. So,
yeah, so can you guys hear me? So I think one of the interesting things too, and I can I share that, was that I came from software engineering background. And I did make the leap into something that's so not software engineering at all. It's governance, risk, and compliance, right? So I think when you say that to someone who's technical, they want absolutely nothing to do with governance, risk, and compliance. But I got an opportunity with my prior employer. I absolutely love it, and I'll do it until they tell me to do something else. I think for a fun fact, I'm not that athletic. I don't actually get out much. I love food. So beer and barbecue. I'm new to Texas, so beer and barbecue is two things I do pretty well. I believe. So that's my thing that I do.
All right, and Stephen Thompson, also with Allstate, who has the coolest title of Threat Hunter. So next to Ghostbuster, I think that's pretty cool.
Right. So are we on? Anyways, I think I might have started my information security career when I was in 5th grade, maybe about 10 years old, with my Apple II computer and a 300 baud modem, right? But boy, I love that Apple II computer. That computer, as soon as you turn it on, you're right there at a programming language that's easy to use. And that Apple computer, you could use a command called peek, and you could look at any memory address inside the computer. And there's a command also called poke, where you could take any address inside that computer's memory and change the bit, 1 to a 0. And that thing was so much fun to play around with, to get to manipulate it and get it to break in all different kinds of ways. And anyhow, I think accomplishments. When I was in the U.S. Navy, I worked in a calibration lab where we were calibrating everything that took a measurement on board this aircraft carrier, and that means like all the equipment we used to test the electronics on the planes also had to come through our shop. And what I got to see was maintenance plans that were unlimited resources to be able to put together maintenance plans and to put together entire engineered systems. And everything we did on that ship, there was some kind of a standard operating procedure. And it was amazing. And in aviation, it's a lot like information security, where, I mean, even maybe to a higher level, because then it's a life and death situation. So you have plans, you create plans, you think in advance, every mistake you have, there's always an accident review. You've got all these controls, everything's codified, right? I mean, it's a huge investment in resources, but I've seen it done well before. Anyhow, a fun fact: I love Adult Swim. That's Cartoon Network at night, and I cannot wait for the new Rick and Morty episodes to come out. Yes, I will be Rick again for Halloween this Christmas. Yes.
All right, great. So one request from the tech people, hold the mics close to your mouth because we're recording it and we want to capture this all. Okay, let's jump right into this. And I'm going to kind of mix it up a little bit since we gave you guys a nice list of all the questions. I'm going to try to throw you some curveballs. Not too bad. So I talked about application security. The topic is around protecting your applications in a DevOps world. Why is application security so critical, and why has it become more so? You want to start with that, Jeff?
So always people have, just a couple people in the office in this audience that I work with my last company, and I always look at the threat in 3 levels. You have your commodity threat, which don't really create any tools or buy tools off the internet, and then you have your criminal gangs that create intellectual property in the cybersecurity space and hand it down to the threat actors, professional criminal gangs, and then the top tier are the nation-state actors. And if you think about those 3 levels of threat, really in that commodity threat level, that's where your security controls and your signature-based controls really are really effective at resisting against those threats, because they're pretty predictable and the tools are well known. Then you get into that criminal gang where they start to evade those security controls. That's where threat hunters and your security operations are able to detect them as they try to do things to bypass your security controls. But then when you get to the top tier level actors, the nation state actors, some of which I've had the good fortune to work with, I won't say from which country, but it's probably pretty obvious. One of the things that really trips them up is what you do inside the application and when you're building product and what happens between the application and the database. And if you really want to resist, I've heard many CISOs throw up their hands and say, I can't do anything against the nation state actor. They're a determined threat actor. They're going to get in, anyway. I challenge that, because I think if you have a great application security program and you think about your defense in depth, and actually start from the inside out, think from the database to the application outward, that you can be effective against the most sophisticated actors.
So maybe, I don't know, Sean, do you want to jump in? So are applications becoming kind of more of the the focal point for the attacks?
Yeah, so when I got started in '97 in security, most people were going after things that were inappropriately exposed, right? Like the big issue we had at the first MSP I worked for was just getting companies to put a firewall in place and start blocking things off from public access, and then installing like layers of security and restricting it to people who just need it for their job. But the one bit of surface area that you can't firewall off is your application, right? The users have to be able to access to it. And what we're really trying to protect at the end of the day isn't the computer or the software or anything like that. It's the data that we're entrusted with securing. And the application has to have, it's the one thing that has to have access to that data in a clear form, unencrypted, anything like that, right? You can store data encrypted on a hard drive and get rid of the storage concern from touching the data directly. You can send it, securely transmit it in an encrypted fashion. There's all sorts of things you can do at every level, but when it comes to the application, it has to touch the data and the users have to interact with the application. So it's the reason why the nation state actors are focusing their efforts there to a large degree is a lot of these companies have gotten really good at segregating off everything that doesn't need to be exposed. But at the end of the day, we have to have the applications exposed. So of course that's where they're going to go focus their efforts now.
So, Frank, maybe we can segue a little bit into this idea of DevOps, creating better code, DevSecOps, closing the loop between some of these disconnects. What's your view of where we are and where we need to go?
Sure. So I think when we think about the attack landscape, applications that service users through the internet or through the network are the most addressable attack landscape, right? So these are the applications that, as you put it, really have open doors for the purpose of actually facilitating their legitimate function. I think we're also moving towards a world where we're building software much, much faster and demonstrating reliances on software code that we didn't write, right? So the app surface is constantly evolving. There are components in the application lifecycle that we didn't build. And this is really this whole mindset of DevOps, right? This idea that we're going to be moving from development very, very quickly into operational access. And really we're going to need to consider security much further left in the process of building software. But that's not always the case for some apps that we buy. We have COTS apps that are part of our attack landscape that we need to defend as well. We have instances where we have business goals we have to achieve despite discovering vulnerabilities in the software development lifecycle. And so we have to move toward an approach by which we can defend apps even when they do have an attack landscape, when they have software components that we're not yet ready to replace, when they have weaknesses in their design, so to speak.
So let me ask either or both of you gentlemen from Allstate, is Allstate embracing this DevSecOps model, improving this whole development process to reduce risk?
So we are trying to integrate, and the term that they use is obviously shift left. Some of those engineering practices into the software development lifecycle, and I think a lot of it will follow some of the practices that we've kind of applied from a testing perspective. I know that I always feel like when we talk about software engineering, test and security are kind of in the same boat, right? Test is, in my opinion, has been slow to be embraced with inside the software engineering teams, and I'd like to at least see security fall along those same lines, almost even be part of that software test paradigm. But we do try to integrate those controls or simple baseline controls from a security perspective very, very early on with inside code development. And we try to make sure that actually gets put into place and it's validated before it pushes to production. But we can only do it with very simple or small amount of controls. The more sensitive, the more risky the application, the more controls get applied. But we can always look for some simple low-level controls that can be applied before it pushes to production, regardless of the app.
And let me maybe, Stephen, let me just expand on that a little bit. So the software that you control, that, if you are improving your DevSecOps process, along with everything else that you don't control, how do you balance that?
At this point right now, I'm assessing controls that are not part of the development environment right now. I just don't have a whole lot of insight into development arena yet at Allstate.
So any of the other gentlemen, in terms of this DevSecOps model, what are your views on it? I've heard a lot of talk about it, a lot of, certainly it's a great direction to go in, but in terms of balancing the hype versus reality or where we are, what do you recommend to your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when DevOps was first coming around, and I was at a company that was a build subscriber of ITIL. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's a big standard about how to operate in whole IT lifecycle environment. And DevOps to them seemed more like a concept than an actual executable strategy. And I think we've matured since then. But security, as I think Brad put it, is still viewed a lot of times as a contamination to the process. These guys were talking about how security is still kind of a bolt-on at the end, right? If you're familiar with the concept of DevOps and a lot of engineering practices, you might have heard of a PR, a pull request, how a lot of engineering teams will basically start merging their work together to something that's shippable. There's already a concept in those workflows for basically testing the software to make sure that it's not broken, that it's working, that it's designed correctly to the specifications that were laid out and the engineers have done their jobs right. And there's a lot of pushback and frustration when the requirements don't line up with the acceptance criteria that those tests are conducted with, right? So if you don't push security left, all the way left, and bake it right into the process at the very beginning and the design requirements, ultimately you'll end up with a solution where it's just DevOps with security trailing off the end and everybody fighting against it because they're incentivized and their mission is to get that product shipped out to their customers. If you want it to work, you gotta bake it in. You gotta contaminate the whole process and make it DevSecOps, and that means putting them into the decision, put them in the team. So at Complyify, something we did, I mean, we're a small company, right? We're 10 people right now. One of the things we did is we literally put our director of security in the bullpen with the engineers. We're a software company, that's the heart of our product. We wanted him to be right there in the heart of things to make sure that it was, part and baked into the process. I know, obviously that won't scale for someone the size of Allstate or something like that. But if you want to get there, those are the steps you have to take.
And let me just add. So I think you're 100% correct, and I think that's brilliant. And there's one thing that we're not addressing that has nothing to do with technology at all, which is that tone at the top. So if the CEO of the company says "thou shalt," right? Because we're incentivizing the wrong things. We're incentivizing time to market for software. We're incentivizing functionality over quality. I think if we incentivize the right thing at the top, those behaviors will follow. But it's in very rare cases where I've seen that incentive.
I got an anecdote to that. If you guys remember the big Home Depot breach from years back, the CEO at the time was quoted as saying when he was questioned why he wasn't taking his team's advice on the improvements they needed to make to their security posture, he said, "We're not a technology company, we sell hammers." He's no longer the CEO. The new CEO, I shit you not, his quote is, "We are a technology company that happens to sell hammers."
Right?
Yeah, so I think I wrote down a couple of principles I think are part of the DevSecOps mindset. And just to share, I think you guys really dug into a lot of them. C-level sponsorship, C-level attention is a core component. A corporate strategy around data security, around application security and endpoint security is an important part of any practice. Beyond that, training. I think it's few and far between when I find practitioners who really understand the entire attack landscape of an application. Some are more focused on the interpreted code layer, some on the compiled, some on host-based, payload-based attacks. But it's really difficult to master all that knowledge and maintain that mastery as time passes. We see new attack techniques every single day. Independent verification. I think that beyond the capabilities that we have in a team, it's important to have our applications vetted as they move toward production by experts who live, eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff, but aren't really thinking about it the same way that you might in your development lifecycle. And then lastly, monitoring in production using a common set of controls. So I think the DevSecOps mindset, this idea that we're shifting security more left into as we're building software, the processes associated with building it, testing it is great. But you don't have to have your back to an application. Essentially, looking at the whole world of threats that exist today or may exist tomorrow, the 0 days we're going to read about in the news tomorrow that achieve remote code execution. There are ways to actually validate throughout runtime that your applications operate the same way that they did as you tested them and built them. So I think that's the real gap that we're seeing in the marketplace today. People, even in this evolution of DevSecOps and this mindset of DevSecOps, are just thinking about it as, well, we're just going to build a better, less vulnerable piece of software, and that's what DevSecOps is about. It's also about providing inferences to your development lifecycle as you see things happen in production, right? So there is this kind of shared operational aspect and information that's being provided back into that dev lifecycle.
Yeah,
just
Jeff.
one quick thought here. If your development teams aren't using automation as part of their continuous integration, continuous deployment, you're never going to get DevSecOps integrated, period. It's a losing battle. And so as we wrote our security standards at Epsilon, we actually wrote our security standards as code. So as we pushed that to the things that are important to developers, I didn't send them a bunch of documents to go read. I sent them code that they could that they could put into their scripts as part of their CI/CD. Unfortunately, not all of our development teams are automated. Our ones in the public cloud are. In our hosted environment, we're getting to that level. But you know, I think that you're kidding yourself if you think you can do DevSecOps. If your development teams aren't using automation, you can establish those guardrails so that they don't have to think about it. And then your goal is for them to use those security guardrails throughout that CI/CD process. And if they want to vary from those guardrails, and that's when you make them go through the ass pain of the change management process that takes 6 months. And I guarantee you they won't do that. They'll figure out a way to code around that.
So let me ask, you might have, we're streaming, you might have broken the internet, but so this whole issue of speed versus security, and I'll let anyone jump in here. When we had a similar panel we did a couple months ago, similarly different companies, but on the same topic, and there seemed to be a consensus that, you know, automation obviously is critical, but when it push comes to shove between a business imperative and being cautious about security, the business always wins, other than it coming from the top, and I like that point. But how do you balance this? How do you make intelligent choices in the trenches when, you know, it's Black Friday and your POS system's been hacked?
If you're a security company like me, right, like there is no choice. You have to prioritize security. You have to lead by example. But for everybody else, security at a company is just going to be a cost center, right? You're not moving the business forward. You're not enabling them. For the most part, you're not even helping sales. I mean, sure, you got to check a box and be compliant and stuff like that, but people game the system to get those checks anyways. But what you have to do if you want to get a good balance in there and get the business to invest is speak their language, right? You have to be speaking the language of risk. Go to them with the metrics about, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the likely consequence of that. Here's the types of investments and how that will affect the outcomes for the business. And now you're enabling the company to achieve their goals, right? You can weave yourself into the company plan, into the quarterly reports that the board goes over and stuff like that. And, you know, large enterprises have long had board level down risk management. But even if you're at a mid-sized company now, and this is the market that we specifically serve, boards are finally realizing at that size too that risk, cybersecurity risk in particular, is something that has to be managed from the top down, but they don't have the metrics to understand it. If you can bring them those metrics, you can be the hero. You can be the person that shows how you're improving the business's outcomes and get what you want done for the company in terms of security. But if you just go to them with expenses for firewalls and investments and stuff like that, they're just going to look at it and be like, do I really have to do this? Like, we passed our audit last year. Why do I got to buy this crap now?
Tony, you're nodding your head. Any thoughts on that?
So I agree. I don't think I've disagreed with anything that you've said for the past 2 hours, but even prior to the conversation, I do think it goes back to the culture, and I think in general, from folks that have been software developers in the past, the main goal is always to target functionality. Right? I got to get functionality out there. My main focus is to actually get it to work properly. It will cost extra dollars, time for the dimensions, for quality, for the dimensions, for security. We do a lot of conversations around having that lean left. So when we're architecting these solutions, we can architect them in a secure way, but developing, actually putting code on paper, sometimes the story gets a little bit different. But it does come down to the conversation around risk versus reward, right? What do you want to prioritize? What's the actual risk of not ensuring that your application is going out with required security controls? And business partner, technology owner, are you okay with that? That's a decision that happens. That's the decision and conversation that happens every day around this. I do think that it's adding more quality, adding more security to the software development lifecycle will cause speed issues. But then I also say too is the average life cycle for the application or the actual end of life is anywhere between, I think, 7 to 15 years. So are you going to expedite the development and save 2 weeks to have a problem that may persist for 7 to 15 years in the future? That problem's going to cost you a heck of a lot more in production than it is on your test environment.
So for me, speed equals revenue. No one gets paid for being slow. And so as a security practitioner, anything that does a drag on revenue is always going to be a issue. So I'm not saying that you can't slow down or you can't trade speed for security, but what we do is we use that talking point to pivot into resiliency, and especially when you come to products and you start coaching on revenue risk and still being able to run multiple clusters of your products so that you can take a cluster down to do maintenance while keeping the other 2 clusters up and live in high availability. So that's how we kind of where we know that we're going to have to do some things and we may have to trade speed for security. That's when we pivot into the talk about resiliency.
I think this whole question, the idea that speed is a choice versus security, really, that we have to either choose that we're going to be fast or we're going to lose security, predicates from a mindset that we can replace. I think that there are ways to ensure that once an application reaches runtime, that it does nothing but what it was designed to do, Virsec. And so when we look at this idea of building better software, building software with less of an attack landscape, defending from the attacks we know might reach our application by standing in front of the application with a WAF or with RASP and trying to filter those from affecting the application's runtime. I think then in that mindset, you think, okay, well then I better build a very well-defined strategy to prevent my application from receiving some input that it might misinterpret as code. But if you're able to actually turn around, look at your application, and recognize when input is being perceived by your application's runtime as if it was code, then you don't have this kind of choice between speed and security. You have both.
So, Stephen, let me ask you, since you're a threat hunter, how do you keep up with all these vulnerabilities, and why do we still see them lingering for so long and hackers still attacking ones that are known as well as unknown?
Part of it is observing Murphy's Law, that anything that can go wrong will go wrong eventually. Part of it is that, you see the same flavor of things just coming up over and over and over again. I mean, a lot of the new vulnerabilities are just old vulnerabilities, just in a different spot, or maybe now they're virtualized, or there's all kinds of websites that you can engage in to stay at. I've got a list at home that I'll refer to once in a while, right? Like for me, if I'm working on some kind of project, maybe I'll be plugged into Bug Track or every possible source I could find for looking for vulnerabilities in a particular environment that I'm focusing on. But watching the news and staying in touch with some websites that are literally devoted just to bringing you to the security news, right? And never underestimate like the human ingenuity or mischievousness ever.
So I always like to compare patching. A lot of people who don't run a complex product environment think of patching as like playing checkers. When you run a complex product environment like we do, we can have anywhere from 8 to 10 applications in one product. Some of them we built, some of them are third party, and trying to line up all the different types of application softwares to get them lined up where you can do something as simple as upgrade to the latest version of Java is like playing Chinese Go. And you know, and not only do you have to figure out how do I, you know, get all these third-party softwares up, you know, when are they going to provide me the latest patch for their core vulnerabilities, but then also coordinate that time with the people you're providing the service for. It really does push, you know, make it where you got to take a risk-based approach and a context-based approach to how you manage vulnerabilities. And you know, a lot of people had no sympathy for Equifax when they said, why didn't they just go patch patchy struts? No, it should have been, it should have been easy. You've never sat in their shoes and seen exactly what the context was of what it took to patch that one server, and how, you know, and it truly is like playing Go as opposed to playing checkers. And so I will never judge people who can't get around to patching everything, because I know how complex it is.
Yeah, any other thoughts on patching? I agree completely. We have do a lot in the ICS space, in the industrial controls, and we've had big companies tell us they've banned patching because it causes other problems. But any other thoughts? How do you manage this from a compliance standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, the short reality of it is humans are terrible at acting consistently, right? Even the best of us out there. I mean, think about your homes, right? What do you care about more than your home and your family security, right? Yet how many times in your life have you woken up and realized you left a window unlocked or something like that, right? Like, you know, we all do stuff like that. And even if it's not you, even if you take it upon yourself to be the most diligent, responsible person ever about the security of the things that are under your influence, it's not all under your control, right? If you're the safest driver in the world, you're still eventually, with enough time on the road, going to get into a wreck because somebody else screwed up. And it's the same thing with our technology stacks, right? Speed is revenue. We can't do everything in-house on our own, engineered to the nth degree. We have to rely upon the efforts of hundreds, thousands, millions of other people who have contributed to these systems. They're too complicated to not have old threats be revisited upon us again. And I get asked a lot because we're in a compliance space, right? And we help people manage risk and governance and their compliance and security objectives and stuff. And people will every once in a while come up to me and be like, well, why do I don't want to care about compliance. I don't want to be compliant. I want to be secure, right? And I always have to remind them that it's like compliance and security are complementary things, right? Like security, there's no such thing as perfect security in the world. You can never achieve it, right? No matter how many technology systems you have out there, your humans will still screw it up. The Target breach, right? They had all the things that they needed to have for PCI, and even their systems were screaming at them for weeks saying people are hacking in your system. They're in there. They're exfiltrating data. The people weren't responding to it. They weren't looking at it. The humans let them down, and that's what I see repeated time and times again in the companies that I've worked with. Is it's almost always the humans that will let you down. And if you want to manage risk, you got to have some way to kind of validate that your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's how you stop regressions or stop having old vulnerabilities and incidents revisit you again.
There's one more thing too. I think there's the instance of being able to patch, right? So can we patch this? There's also the whole conversation around what to patch. So when you look at vulnerability management programs, there's two things you kind of have to look at. You have to look at the new vulnerabilities in the space, and then the exploitable vulnerabilities in the space. So an interesting thing is that people will say, well, just focus on the exploitable vulnerabilities, prioritize those vulnerabilities, do a risk-based approach, and patch those that are available. The growth of non-exploitable vulnerabilities is absolutely insane. And so you have to know what that threat intelligence is for that non-exploitable vulnerability to one day become exploitable, and prioritize the patching of that as well too, right? So it's this game of what do I patch? Not only is it able to be patched, but what do I patch? And I think that's significant. That's a really, really big problem in the industry right now.
So we're coming up on 7:30. I want to be respectful of people's time. Of course, this is a great conversation. Anyone from the audience, if you have some questions, we just asked you to use a mic. Please jump in. Give it maybe a few more minutes here. So I'm curious, we've used this term shift left a lot, and sort of implying that you're going to push more and more security education or awareness or training onto the developers. But doesn't it also have to go the other direction as well? Do the developers have to sort of understand the realities of what you're talking about with patching and vulnerabilities? And how do you bridge that gap, or can you?
I mean, of course, you want everyone to be empowered with the knowledge of how they can operate securely for your company and the responsibilities they have based on their job functions. But at the end of the day, they're developers, right? You can't expect them to come with a wealth of knowledge about security and threats and stuff like that. I mean, I hope that the schooling and everything that we have in place is going to start building that more into the programs, but just start embedding your security people in with the developers is my best advice. And if you don't have it, then go find someone who can help train them up and start bringing that knowledge into your organization.
Yeah, for my product security team, I'm recruiting developers from the product teams to come and train them on security so that they speak the language. And they also come from the product teams that are the most troublesome, so that we can get those relationships going. Because at the end of the day, with our product security team, it's really about developing those relationships and influencing the product teams to follow the guidance that we've already put out there, and as well as the training. We have automated tools that do all of our app scanning, both static and dynamic, and then we tie that back to training. We even got a module that we've hooked into some of our development environments that literally, as they type, it will show them mistakes they're making, like Word does. Like, I'm dyslexic, and every third word I type is red. Same thing with our development environment. So as much as we can, just being able to speak the language and get those human APIs connected is where we try to put a lot of our focus.
So I'll kind of answer this with a joke that resonated well with my team. When we think about cybersecurity, we think about this idea of building better software and QAing our software. Let's say we an analogy we'll use is a guy walks into a bar. Guy walks into the bar, he orders 0 beers. Guy walks into the bar, he orders 50 beers. Guy walks into the bar, he orders 9,999 beers. Guy walks in the bar, he orders a lizard, right? That's the way our automated testing works. Then subsequently, second guy walks in the bar, he asks where the bathroom is. Whole bar lights on fire, everyone dies. So the idea that I'm kind of trying to poke fun at is that the inferences that you derive when your applications reach runtime, the ways in which your customers use your applications when they're in production, in many cases can't be anticipated as you build software. And so what this means is, without the visibility, without the approach by which you can look at what your application is doing and how your users are using it, the sequences they're using it in, the ways in which they're trying to break your software if they're a malicious attacker, without those making their way back into your software development lifecycle, or even the mindsets that are being applied to the development of your software, you're kind of operating blind. Sure, you could build as many test cases as we want, you can automate them, but I can almost guarantee you that you will miss something, and that an attacker will use what you've missed.
So quick reminder, we're having a raffle in just a couple minutes. If you didn't get your card into the spinning wheel, wherever it is, please do. We got some neat prizes. So please jump in if you have questions from the audience. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you guys, Frank, let's just go down the row. Give us your parting thoughts in terms of, what do you recommend? What should people do here?
Yeah,
what should
I think
organizations do?
I spent a lot of time working with organizations like Tanium. They do a great job at patching and improving visibility in endpoint space. I worked at Malwarebytes, where we tried to stop attacks both pre and post execution as they reached endpoints. Where I see a big gap today is in the area of AppSec, specifically how solutions that we leave the doorways open to for the outside world to use, or that house the most critical data that run our applications, how we look at them as they execute, right? How we validate that they're doing what they should do. Traditionally, we're using WAFs, we're using RASP technologies, we're using IDS, IPS, we're using host-based technologies and EPP and EDR to try and prevent input from being misinterpreted as code, or contain input once it becomes code. There is a stage in between. That's when measured in microseconds, as input is misinterpreted by your application as code, and it can be grasped. It can be mastered. Your application's execution can be held to that. And so that's why I'm here at Virsec. That's what I believe our DevSecOps mindset will evolve to, ensuring the runtime integrity of our applications, and I'm excited to be bringing that to the world today.
All right, great. Jeff, parting thoughts and what you recommend?
Yeah, automation's your friend. Embrace it, learn it, make sure your teams understand it, and when you write your security standards, make sure that they're translatable into code. And because at the end of the day, if a developer just has to run another script to get done what you need to get done, they'll do that. That's not a lot of problems for them.
You want to be a security advocate in life and in your company? Here's your motto: fish your friends.
I want to back something that Jeff said. Being able to define methods that are acceptable, being able to reuse those methods over and over. What you said about instead of having written standards, that you have standard code that gets to be reused. That's thinking logistically, right? That's staging up your resources in a manufacturing environment, having things ready to go. That kind of staging. You didn't have to make a decision between security and speed. You got a win-win situation. So.
Get rid of the humans. Yeah. Sorry, and Tony, any parting thoughts here?
I'll just go with fundamentals. Know your assets inside your organization. Know how important or critical they are, and apply the controls to what you feel is appropriate inside the conversations that you're having with the business partners and the tech folks.
All right. Well, let me thank all of you. This is a great discussion. All of these things we could go on for hours, but really, really relevant. And thank you to the audience. So, couple things. We're going to do the raffle. Also, we have a pile of additional things we brought along: some white papers, some screen cleaners, nifty little LED flashlights. Please take some on your way out. I don't want to take them home with me. So who's going to be our raffle drawer? Okay.
Willie, thank you guys so much. And everyone here on the panel, thank you guys so much for contributing to our community. Can we get a big round of applause over here? Now, all right, that's enough. That's enough. Not that great. Come on. I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you coming out, making a community out of this. The 2020 season is going to be amazing. I really hope that I get to engage with you guys again during that 2020 season, and that we continue to contribute and give back. We're over time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time and agenda. We have time for one question for the panel. So does anyone have a question out there? You do right there? Come on up. Use this. Oh, wait, we'll pass the mic to you. So be sure to speak into the microphone, because otherwise it won't get caught on the recording. Yeah, just hit him with it. It comes out of the case.
Hi, everyone. Darren England, Allstate. You guys talked a lot about automation, about integration of application processes, improvement, things like that. Have we been thinking about across the industry what it looks like to make sure that we still incorporate the human mind and human touch to how we build out these applications and operations and coding, right? I think more on the software side as we start to develop coding and how it starts to make decisions as it pertains to people, products, and services, and the risks that come along with the gaps of the human mind. So do you all think it's still important as we think about automation, which you've talked about a lot, to make sure that we're very intentional and thoughtful with who's creating the code, who's creating the application, who's creating the security, and what that looks like?
Oh, yeah. Stephen, go ahead.
I have a psychology degree, and some people may look at me someday. What was it, Experian, where the CISO was a music major, and they questioned, how is a music major in charge of security? Well, I'm psychology. It's about people, right? It's about inspiring people, changing people's minds. It's about a culture. It's about ethics. People. It's all about human factors and reaching people.
I mean, humans have weaknesses, like I said, right? We will never be able to operate perfectly or consistently. None of us will. And technology can help to cover those gaps. But at the end of the day, like the software that we're building is specifically helping to mitigate those risks that humans will inevitably bring to any process that they're involved with and the inconsistencies thereof. And, automation is a necessary part of that for most companies to be able to weave those capabilities into their fabric of their existence, right? Like we all can't be, Allstate, like I don't have an army of people, so I depend so heavily on automation to make the company work. But yeah, and they're going to necessarily have to be complementary when it comes to technology and systems and consistency and stuff like that. And of course, who makes the automation, right? It's people at the end of the day.
So when we talk about automation, we're talking about automating the things that we don't want our humans to spend time doing, not the valuable time sitting there watching a machine spin up and make sure that all the patches load and all that kind of stuff. We want, machines can do that. Doesn't take cognitive capability to do that. No matter what anybody says, artificial intelligence does not have cognitive capabilities today. It just can do things a lot really fast. And so we're not really trying to replace the humans or have fewer humans. We're trying to get the humans doing more valuable things that are more valuable to the company. For us, a lot of our product teams spend as much as 30% of their time gathering evidence for compliance audits that we do. And, so to drive that down to just be able to show an automated process that our auditors can come and look at. Now I've freed up 30% of the time of the developers to go build better code or to do more maintenance. So it's really just trying to carve out, get the humans doing more valuable things.
So I get a slightly different spin on your question, given that your background, as I understand it, is in recruiting and finding talent. Really, I think about that's a challenge I faced every organization that I've worked with. There's this process of identifying the right talent. Then there's this process of recruiting that talent, right? Like, why should I go work there? Then there's this process of retaining talent, and then I think there's also a process of creating talent internally with resources. And I think all of those different phases in the development of cyber practitioners are really hard challenges. So the ways that we handle it, at least at Virsec and the other organizations I worked at, compartmentalize, identify specific key competencies, and make experts in those space if you can't find them. I think that to some degree, I really believe that the folks that should be advising your security practice should be able to whip out a laptop and write code to some degree. I think that's a necessity. I don't care if it's from an educational background in a university or from homeschooled, but if they can't whip out a laptop and write code, like I struggle to trust that their judgment about how an application works or how it might stop working the way it's supposed to should be. But at the same time, there's this gap bridging activity where the person that understands how code works and what it should do and how it should do it needs to be able to articulate that in conjunction with business objectives. And that's a completely separate competency than having the right people fundamentally that help you build software and build secure it. And so in many cases, focusing on compartmentalizing, creating clear, specific definition of what those competencies are, how you can identify and test those in the hiring and retention process is where we spend our time at Virsec.
Yeah. So Stephen, I saw that you were nodding your head emphatically when he was saying that his stakeholders need to know how to code, right? Looked like you definitely had an opinion on that.
Right. When you get yeah, when you get to see examples of what goes wrong and how it goes wrong, you start to appreciate. It gives you a sense of appreciation.
Yeah. So Tony, what do you think about that? Just real quick as we wrap up.
So I know that most people might not have this perspective on writing code, but I look at it as a creative process. When I sit down, and write code, I have to get into a specific mindset. I'm producing something. When I do automate things, I'm doing something that doesn't take a lot of creative brain power, that I just want to kind of get through so I can get to that next piece where I'm creating something. So I don't look at I do think automation does reduce cycle time to push through the application through. I do think it actually does reduce cost, but it reduces cycle time and cost for those things that take very little brain power, like Jeff was saying. So I don't look at it as necessarily a negative thing. I look at it as a thing so that I can do quickly to get to the next thing that will take creative power.
Yeah, people's jobs aren't going away. They're just changing, right? And they're changing in ways we never would have imagined. This is absolutely great. I've learned a lot from this panel audience. I hope that you guys have learned a lot too. I wish we had more time for your questions, guys. Thank you so much. Please feel free to leave the stage. Okay, so Sean Richards, if you want to come on up here, help me with the raffle. So we've got a few prizes. We've got some powered mouse pads technology, which is kind of interesting. And then we have 2 free tickets to the Hackers Ball. Like I said, the Hackers Ball is a very important event to our community. There's a big push in the Dallas hackers community to stop child trafficking, both in a red team and a blue team way. I encourage anybody here who participates in Dallas events to please think about how you can contribute to stopping this plague, especially since the Dallas Police Department is having a lot of problems with its vice unit. If you're interested in that, I can tell you more. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to step off the stage. But as you can tell, this is an issue which is very personal to me, and which I take very seriously. And if you win these tickets, please, please consider going so you can learn more about it. Okay, so without further ado, oh, you want the mic?
Give me the mic. So the Innocence Project spends about $10,000 for every file they pass over to authorities, collecting OS int and other intelligence on I guess threat actors in the that arena. So it's a lot of money and effort to hand over that information, and so it just seems like an amazing foundation to support. And I'd love to see everybody out there. We actually brought 4 tickets to give away today.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
And love to see you there. It's not expensive if you don't win the ticket. It's $26, and the majority of the money does go to the foundation. So just love to see everybody out there.
Okay, so should we do the pads first?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right,
Do you want to give them away?
4 total prizes, right?
These are mouse pads.
Oh, I like that one. Can I just pick one?
Is it yours? All right, mousepad number 1 goes to, do we have Jacob Williams from Citrix? Yay!
Who's the winner?
Do you want me to wait, or can I keep drawing? We have one more. Do we have one more mouse pad?
Yep.
Jacob put his business card in twice. No, Gustavo Osorio, also from Citrix.
Okay, I think we're ready.
What's?
You already draw it?
I did.
All right, let's do it.
So this is for
This is for 2 tickets to the Hackers Ball.
and Michael Fortin, senior IT recruiter from Allstate. And the Hackers Ball tickets are courtesy of Tanium.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good.
And the next winner is Travis Newshot with General Data Tech, GDT. Travis, you still here? Oh, present to win.
Too bad for Travis.
Okay. Darren Anglin with Allstate. All right. Congratulations.
All right, I guess that's everybody, right? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and break up. I encourage you that if you're looking for a position, talk to the Allstate team, talk to the ISSA guys. Also, we run a Slack channel. I encourage you to join the Slack channel. It's available on the Meetup page.
On November 14th, we're doing a hackathon.
Oh, yeah!
And it'll be back at Allstate. So that'll be in the
Control hackathon. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big big deal. We have a big sponsor coming down they're doing a national tour with our national organization. They just finished an event in Charlotte. It was amazing. They're going to come here to Dallas, bring all that experience and all that knowledge. I think you guys are going to have a great time if you come. Oh, and I want to tell you a little bit about the 2020 season. If you're a member who likes to get involved in stuff, we're planning the 2020 season now. So we're doing some law enforcement engagements. We're going to do some cyber insurance engagements. We're going to do if you guys have ever heard of Hack the Box, we're going to do a Hack the Box expert track, which will basically turn you into a penetration expert by the end of the year. Some really exciting stuff coming up in that. I encourage you guys to get involved. Sean and I were out there every day, beating members and, well, not beating members, beating down doors to get members. So please consider getting involved in our community and helping us build content for 2020.
So we have a number of open roles that we'd like help with. So if anybody's interested in volunteering for the team, we'll be by that speaker.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Stand up. Get out of here.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.